Good evening, and welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Education for June 19th, 2023. This will be the public hearing with regard to the proposed 2023-2024 budget and millage rates. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Thank you, President Johnson. Mrs. Acosta is absent. Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is here. President Johnson?
Here, we do have a quorum, thank you. That takes us to item 2, audience communication, and I have one blue slip for this meeting, and that is Mike Testa. Good evening, Mr. Testa.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you. I just want to make a brief comment. As it pertains to the budget, I wanted to voice support for Project Lead the Way. I have 2 children at Hoover that were part of the pilot program, and it was an amazing program. They loved it, and also bugging Superintendent Oquist over the past year about making it permanent at Hoover and across the district. I knew this day would come, and which would be more of a budget proposal to get it through. But I know there's a lot of benefits, and not just the program itself, but moving the specials around, efficiencies with the schedule. I think it's great. My kids recognized not only the great class that it is, but also the benefits that it brings. Not to steal anyone's thunder for the next meeting, but I can't stick around. I also wanted to touch on something I saw on the agenda for next meeting, that Dr. Terrell will be leaving Livonia Public Schools. I also wanted to voice strong public support for her. She's been a big ally and support to my family over the years. Very helpful, always listens, whether I always had constructive comments, positive comments, or ideas. She was always listening and willing to talk about things. So I will miss that. I hope whoever replaces her will have that same skill set, and I welcome her going to RISA and probably helping on the special ed for Livonia Public Schools. So a shout out to both Mr. Green for proposing Project Lead the Way, and to Dr. Terrell for all the support over the years. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testa. That takes to item 3, a public hearing, proposed 2023-2024 budget and millage rates. And I'll invite Mrs. Smith up.
Thank you, President Johnson. It's my pleasure to talk to the board tonight. We've obviously been going over this for the last several months, looking what our final budget amendment will be for this school year, and then looking ahead to next year and the budget for next year, and what millage rates we'll need to make our budget work. So with that, we've got a couple slides that we'll throw up for you. This next slide will show our final amendment that's going to be coming to the board in just a little while for your vote. The next slide. It's coming. There we go. So this school year, we started the school year off with $33.7 million. We've brought in roughly $174.3 million, and we've spent roughly $177.5 million, or we expect to spend roughly $177.5 million. That will leave us with an ending fund balance of $30.4 million, or 17.2%. So I've made a note down at the bottom, as it has become custom. I've adjusted the beginning fund balance for next year by $1 million more than what the ending fund balance is. That's to recognize that we do have to budget for some uncertainties, and as we've seen over history, we typically don't expend every dollar that's been authorized by the board. So we've increased the beginning fund balance by $1 million. So in our proposed budget, we're starting with $31.4 million. I estimate bringing in $176.7 million, expenditures to be $175.9 million, to end next school year with $32.2 million, or an 18.3% fund balance. So a few things going into our proposed budget. First off, the revenues. To speak to that, a majority of our funding comes from the state in the form of a per pupil foundation allowance. We've seen proposals from each of the House, the Senate, and the Governor's office, but we are yet to have a final budget from them. So these truly are estimates, our best estimates going into the school year. We've also budgeted for a decline in enrollment. And looking back at the last 5 years, thinking that we'll continue to see a drop in students, so we've budgeted for 150 student loss this coming school year. And then a note about our fund balance. So it's, when you see the dollar amounts, it looks, rather large, so we like to talk in terms of percentages. The first percentage I'll share with you is what the state deems as minimum. 5% or below, they consider that to be an early warning district. So districts are encouraged to keep a fund balance at minimum 5%, but hopefully more than that. The next range we look at is what's recommended by the Michigan School Business Officials. They recommend a fund balance of 15 to 20%. So you can see our ending budget for this school year and our proposed budget for next year keeps us within that 15 to 20% recommended range. So this is what the budget looks like. On the next slide, we'll go over what the proposed millage rates would be for us. The first is for our general fund, our operating millage. So this, as you know, we are required by the state to levy 18 mills to make the full, to gain the full foundation allowance. They assume that we're collecting some revenue here locally, so they back that out of the payments they make to us. So we're proposing to levy those 18 mills. Also proposing to levy 4.1 mills for the debt retirement fund. So this would be paying back the bonds that have been authorized by the community for capital improvements throughout the district. And then the last is our sinking fund. This also is a millage that helps us with the capital improvements throughout the district. We've primarily used it for roofs, parking lots, and boilers. And I'll mention all three of these millage rates. These are the rates that were levied last year, so we're looking at no change to the rates for this coming school year. And with that, the last thing I'll mention is, of course, those are some of the highlights of our general fund and our sinking fund, but we have a number of other funds as we went over in detail at the Committee of the Whole meeting. So the community is, of course, welcome to go back and look at our Committee of the Whole meeting. And we'll also, after tonight, have our budgets uploaded onto the transparency page on our website. So we've got an icon in the upper right-hand corner of our homepage. And so if you click on that icon, that'll take you to our transparency page, and then they can see the detailed breakdown of our budgets for each one of these funds. So that's it. I'll pause there in case you've got any questions for me.
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
Just a comment of those who are integrally involved in the whole budgeting process understand what the 15 to 20% is for. But can you enlighten the public on some of the benefits of having that 15 to 20%? One of them that comes to my mind immediately is not having to borrow for the beginning of the school year because we don't get payments from the state until well into the fall.
Yes, that our fund balance can be thought of as our savings account, our emergency fund. So you obviously do not want to have nothing. We need some cushion. What we've had to do in the past, because we haven't had a sufficient fund balance, we've had to borrow from the state. How the payments come from the state, they start in October and they go through August. So even though we start school in end of August, beginning of September, we go a whole month without a payment from the state. So a number of districts are in the position that they need to borrow money so that they can make payrolls for the first few pays of the school year. With a sufficient fund balance like we have, we haven't had to borrow money for at least the last 5 years. We've had that savings that has gotten us through to the October state aid payment. The fund balance also helps us for times of uncertainty. You know, the most recent that comes to mind was in 2020. At the start of the pandemic, we were warned by the state that we should prepare for cuts. Not cuts next year, but cuts in the current school year. They, at the time, told us to prepare for up to a $650 per pupil cut. So for us, that's in the neighborhood of a $6 million cut. That's, that would be very hard to do when you're so far into the school year. Obviously, there's a few things that you can adjust, but very hard to do. Thankfully, because we had the fund balance that we did, we were able to ride that out to see, is it, as bad as it is, and if it is, we have the fund balance to cover it, and we'll obviously make adjustments for the coming year. Thankfully, the cuts weren't as bad as they thought. We still did see a $2 million cut, though, in funding for that school year, for the 1920 school year. And again, because we had the fund balance, we were able to ride that out. We didn't have to make significant cuts to the program, and we were able to continue as we normally do. So that's another benefit. Another one that comes to mind, especially with the passage of our last bond in 2020, is that it positively impacts our credit rating. And what does that mean for our community? It means lower interest costs when we have to borrow to do these capital projects. So we just recently saw an upgrade in our credit rating, and that's in large due to our fund balance and the decisions that the board's made over the last number of years. So just a few reasons why it's important to have a healthy fund balance.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank our community for supporting the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, which is one of several pieces, but a very important piece in helping us build our fund balance back up to that 15 to 20% recommended range. Many of us were involved in the school district or on the board during 2008 when we did see very, very significant cuts and in programming and everywhere in the school district because the recession had gotten so difficult. And it's taken several years past then, but it's nice to be in a position where we are very financially healthy again. But the Wayne County Enhancement Millage is one significant piece of that, and for that, we'd like to thank, again, our community for supporting that very, very important millage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrett. Other questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
Thank you. I just, as Mr. Testa said earlier in comments, I'm proud of the investment that we're making in our kids with this budget. I think it's really high level because we can't go through the budget every week when we do it, and it's really just an approval meeting. But the significant investment that the administrative team has made and the board's committed to with the student achievement and really looking into how we can improve students' achievement, but also mental, social, emotional health, and many layers, I think, that are included in this budget that I'm really proud of. And so thanks to the team and the board for investing in the kids, and even with our STEM program that we're investing in, I think it's really important. And so, although we're not going through line by line like we did many meetings, I just think it's vital for the community to know that we are investing in our students and staff.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Any other questions? I have one, Mrs. Smith. You mentioned a minimum of 5% fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what the consequences are of going below that?
Sure. Once you hit that 5% or below amount, you have to do additional reporting to the Department of Treasury, the Michigan Department of Treasury. So you're on their watch list. So you're submitting budget assumptions to them, sharing your enrollment projections, and in essence, adding additional oversight from the state. If you do go below that, because they are fearful if you're below 5% that you're heading towards a deficit. They, of course, are looking at multiple factors, not just your fund balance. They do look at your enrollment trends. They also look at your revenue and expenditure trends. And as we've talked about before, too, there's one matter if you're having a planned use of your fund balance. You know, we are trying to keep our fund balance within a 15 to 20% range, and we want to use the funds we have now, obviously, on the kids in front of us and do so responsibly. But if you continue over the years to continue to spend more than what you're bringing in revenue, you're heading towards deficit, which is a budget that can't be approved by the board, and obviously we can't continue to operate that. And then you would see significant program cuts and whatnot. Thankfully, that's not on the table for us. You know, over the last couple of years, we have had a few years where we've dipped into our fund balance, but it's been a very intentional use of those fund balances.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith, and thank you to your team for keeping us where we are.
Thank you.
We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. That'll take us to item 4, our adjournment. If there is no other business to be brought before this meeting, then we are adjourned, and we will take about a 2-second recess, and then we'll be back. Thank you.
We're 10 minutes off from the next meeting, right?
Actually, it's 6:30.
I'm reading the date, not the time. It says 6:19. Pardon my vision, maybe I ought to put these on. Okay, we're gonna go with these now. Okay, look at that.
When you said 10 minutes, I was like, we're right on time.
Yeah. I'm thinking, my goodness, that seemed like more than 6 minutes.
Yeah.
4 minutes, never mind, my math is not even right. Okay. After 6A? Okay. 6A? Oh, gotcha. A break. Did you hear that we're gonna take a break after 6A?
Okay.
Did you assign these other two? Yes. Okay. 6A. Got it.
Are you sure? You can just take this to see you.
Okay. Got it.
Counting us down again. Good evening and welcome back. This is the regular meeting of the Board of Education for June 19th, 2023. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Acosta is absent. Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mrs. Bonnefield is here. President Johnson?
Here, we do have a quorum, thank you. And Mrs. Burton, would you lead us in the pledge tonight?
Yes. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome again to our regular meeting. If you want to follow along with our agenda tonight, if you go out the left-hand door and turn to the right, there's a table out there that you can find them. If you're watching from home, you can go to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org. You can highlight over the board tab, and if you drop down to the board meeting information, you'll be able to follow along with our agenda. As I indicated, this is a regular meeting, or what we call our voting meeting. This is the meeting where the items come before the board that have generally been presented to us on at least 2 occasions before tonight. Therefore, you probably won't hear a lot of discussion on the items that are coming up. If you really want to hear a lot of discussion, I would urge you to go to our Committee of the Whole meetings, and you can see them on our website. That's where we get into the nitty-gritty and iron out any difficulties that we may have with any issues on these items. So you won't hear a lot of debate on them tonight. One of the things that we hold very near and dear to our heart is our community with character. And one of the items that there is respect. We respect each other. We may not always agree with each other, but we respect each other's opinions. And you have our word that we will respect anyone that comes before this board, and we ask that you likewise respect the board if you have comments. We find that this is the best way to teach our children, is by example. And we hope that any children, we have some tonight, see that and follow that example. So we will then go to our first item, which is item 3, our communications. And item 3A is recognition of the LPS robotics sponsors and acceptance of gifts. I think Mrs. Jenkins. All right, you want to do the motion first? All right. This is a motion item, so may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the generous monetary and in-kind donations to the Livonia Public Schools First Robotics Teams. These include Isheen Technical Center of America, Incorporated, $10,000 monetary donation. Bosch Engineering North America, $8,000 monetary donation. Roush Management LLC, $5,000 monetary donation. ZF TRW Automotive, $4,000 monetary donation. Ford Motor Company, $3,000 monetary donation. 4M Industries Incorporated, $1,500 monetary donation. H.M. White LLC, $1,000 monetary donation. Operating Engineers Incorporated, $1,000 monetary donation. Parks Maintenance Incorporated, $1,000 in-kind donation. First in Michigan, grant donation. General Motors, Dollars for Doers program and mentors. Siemens in-kind donation, software and CAD computers. Showstack Brothers and Company Incorporated, in-kind donation, building use. And Tom Promo Marketing, in-kind donation, marketing brochures and so on.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, and I will turn it over at this time to Mrs. Jenkins. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, President Johnson, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. As we all know, our Livonia Public Schools robotics teams continue to grow and thrive thanks to the dedicated students, parents, volunteers, mentors, sponsors, and of course, the program's fearless leader, Miss Iselina Carlini, was joining me somewhere. Oh, she's over in the corner. Tonight we are excited to personally thank and celebrate the many community members, community partners who have contributed to the first robotics program in LPS. At this time, I would like to invite Ms. Carlini to join me at the podium, where she will present a special certificate. I'm going to be her helping hand up here because she also has another really nice item to present to our sponsors. The certificate from the district reads Livonia Public Schools Certificate of Appreciation, donation to Livonia Public Schools First Robotics Teams for generously supporting the Livonia Public Schools robotics teams during the 2022-2023 school year. And then it lists the name of the donor, and that's dated today's date, June 19th, 2023, and signed by Superintendent Oquist. So at this time, we will kick off the thanks. And also, I would be remiss without mentioning our other special guest this evening, the Green Lightning and Tyrostein, or Stein. That's so cool. Hopefully we do have a good camera angle so we can get the robots in the video link there. Okay, Ms. Carlini?
Good evening and welcome.
Thank you for having us, Board of Education, Superintendent Oquist, cabinet members. We appreciate your support so very much. I just want to make a comment about Green Lightning here. If you notice, he can hear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Green Lightning! And he kind of cheers with the crowd. These kids do all kinds of great things. I will need to announce these. Yeah, okay. To kick off tonight, we're going to have Asian Technical Center of America. I believe Mr. Joe Gabanowitz is here. I want to mention that Asian Corporation not only supports our teams $10,000 a year, they also sponsor the Churchill competition at $15,000 through First in Michigan. But I just wanted to mention that. So, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Joe, we have a photo for you as well. Okay, sponsors, you can come right by and grab your photo back there.
Outstanding.
That's neat.
So nice.
Bosch Engineering of North America.
We got somebody from Bosch. Nobody here from Bosch.
Blake or Jeff? Okay. We'll
We'll get them the
take
picture.
that back for them. Oh, this is going to be a big one. Ford Motor Company. All of our Ford guys, come on down. Eric, Adam Stratton, thank you.
Who gets the picture?
General Motors Corporation.
GM?
We should probably put some yellow tape.
Thank you so much. H.M. White. H.M. White has been with us since the beginning.
That's great.
Operating engineers. Parks Maintenance is not able to make it this evening, but we wanted to acknowledge them as well. Roush Management, LCC.
Okay.
Steve Sakata, not here? Okay. All
Seattle.
right, thank you. Showstack Brothers and Company Incorporated communicated that they would not be able to come, but we wanted to acknowledge them as well. Siemens Corporation. Thank you so much. There you go. A great friend to the robotics team since the very beginning, Tom Promo Marketing. ZF, TRW Automotive. And this is Forum Industries. Mr. Alan Marsh had to regret last minute that he was able to come, but we did want to acknowledge them as well. And I'd like Mr. Phil Francis to come up, please. Is he here?
He's a little bashful when it comes to the microphone.
Well, Phil Francis and Harry Lau worked really hard for us, and we appreciate very much the work that both of them did. And although we're presenting this to the whole school system, I just wanted to shake his hand. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
Yes, congratulations on a fabulous season.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Surprise. You know, it wasn't that long ago that our robotics team was just a group of kids and their mentor in working out of the back of a van. They didn't have space. They didn't have a lot of participation. It was a new idea with a group of really enthused people. And in not too much time, we have 2 high school teams that have gone on to compete at world level. We have 3 middle school teams. We've got 5 brand new elementary teams with more in the wings. What a fabulous program. The support of our district for the robotics team has really carried over to every level of education in our district and given students an opportunity to try new things that they never ever thought they might be able to do in a safe environment that's also fun and filled with hands-on project-based learning. I can't think of a better way for a kid to experiment and decide what they want to do when they grow up. As Mrs. Carlini says, this is the only sport that we have where everybody who participates has a chance to go pro. I hope they all do. Thank you, Mrs. Carlini, for all your years of service and your dedication and commitment to this incredible program.
Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson, and welcome. I would love to have any of our students on any of our robotics teams who are here this evening, please stand up and be recognized. Any of our students. We are thrilled to have you here this evening. We know it has been an unusual year for you as you've moved locations and worked really hard out of a temporary location, and we cannot wait to get you into your beautiful new facility. And I'd like to thank so many of the mentors and volunteers who came up to the podium today, because you were some of the very people who helped us in the creation of the design of the robotics center that is being built right now. So while we're grateful for your help each and every day as mentors, as volunteers, your help in that role was especially important, and we hope you will be as proud as we are of the new facility. So we continue to be so proud of all of your accomplishments, not just on the competition field, but the ways you give back to our community, the ways that you bring the light of these wonderful robots and your ingenuity and your creativity out into the community and really engage others. For that, we are just as proud as the work you do on the field. So thank you to each and every one of you, all of the parents who are here tonight, the coaches. This group has more volunteers, more committed volunteers and mentors than really anyone I know. So thank you, Mrs. Carlini, for leading the group so well, to all of our coaches, and to each of our students. We are so proud of you.
Anything else? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonifield. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
I would. Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
President Johnson.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. And I forgot to mention, we're going to take a short recess after item 6A, which is the appointment of our Student Services Coordinator. So that should be in just a few minutes. Now we were on to item 3B, our district update from the superintendent. I'll turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. We have had marathon updates the past couple of months, and so this year is really just a more brief wrap-up of a wonderful year. So we'll get started highlighting our class of 2023. So as you look on the screen, you are going to see some very, very proud graduates coming through their commencement ceremony. So we had over 1,000 seniors graduate from Livonia Public Schools this year. We start with pictures from the Franklin High School commencement, which was our first one at the of the weekend, held at USA Hockey Arena, so many smiling faces. We move on to our Churchill grads, and it's always great when we can catch the moment when their caps fly in the air. They were just a wonderful, wonderful group, and each ceremony had its own own special touches and flair. Next, we had our graduates from Stevenson High School, again, filling the arena with lots of proud family members. One of the nice things about having it there is there really is no limit, so family members can bring their whole gang with them, which has been wonderful. And then we had a wonderful transition program graduation ceremony at Franklin High School, and we were so proud of our students who are exiting the Franklin transition program. It was wonderful to hear individually about each of our graduates. And then, of course, we got a chance to visit just last Monday with our Livonia transition program graduates. They're coming up on the screen soon. And here are just a few of them. We were over at Schoolcraft College, which I know you know is where our wonderful program is housed. And also you see many of our students here on the screen who are no longer with the program, not because they've aged out, but because they have been offered employment based on one of their work sites. We are just unbelievably proud of the program, each and every one of the staff members who work so with such love and care and so diligently on behalf of our students, and it was great to see their families and many of their employers there as well. And then we rounded it out with an amazing graduation ceremony held at Franklin High School this year with our Garfield Skills Center graduation. And so Mrs. Sproul led a wonderful team there, and we got to celebrate with each and every one of our students who came across the stage with wonderful enthusiasm, and that was a great morning as well. So all in all, over 1,000 graduates in LPS. And I am so grateful to all of our staff who worked to put together each and every one of these celebrations. They are unique to each school, unique to each set of graduates, and I know that we're filled like proud parents when we see each of our students come across the stage. So it's been a great celebration at the end of the year. Speaking of the end of the year, we'll see some fun pictures as we come through here. Cooper Upper Elementary took their entire school to the zoo. Now, I remember as a teacher being a little nervous about taking one class of students. So I can tell you, I think that was fantastic that the entire school got to go. They ended up having a wonderful weather day and a great time at the zoo. Lots of great field trips this time of year. We see some of our Emerson students had a blast at Cedar Point, so it is a tradition that our 8th grade students head off to Cedar Point after the close of the school year, and each of those trips went very well. We saw lots of popsicles and lots of colored powder. So as you can imagine, we had lots of field days and tug of wars and color runs. And you see those smiling faces of not only our kiddos, but our staff. And I don't know about you, but I know for my own kids, those were some of their best memories as you think about a school year and ending with those special celebrations, which take a ton of time on the part of our staff and all of our amazing parent volunteers. So next we'll see our team life skills from Mrs. Craven's class at Garfield. They clearly had a ton of fun at their end of the year picnic and barbecue. Looks like they had some yummy things to eat as well. And we had kindergarten roundup. I know I shared with you at our last meeting that we had roundup coming up. And I have to tell you, this was one of our favorite things. So at many of our roundups, it was signing day. So you think it's a big deal when they sign on as a college athlete. Well, let's compare it to the class of 2036 coming in. This group is pretty special, and so they got a chance to have their own moment and their own signing day at many of our K-4 schools. And you see both Cleveland and Buchanan principals, Mr. Witherspoon and Mrs. Wilson here with some of our happy friends who are coming in. And I love on the left there, I think the pencil is as big as he is, but what a cool idea. It's not just our seniors headed off to college. So you might see some familiar faces in this picture, but how great that, again, as I just mentioned, our Warriors and Tyros teams have been out and about in the community, and this is one of the things that they do that is so very special. I know they are a hit every year at our Bounce Back to School event, and they oftentimes will take opportunities to be out and about in the community. You see them here at the Miracle League in Plymouth, volunteering at Passport to Safety, which was on June 10th here in Livonia, and then had some demonstrations at the Stroll for Epilepsy at the Detroit Zoo. So as if they were not busy enough, they also give of their time and talent and the love for what they do out in our community, which we are so appreciative of. Any of you in those pictures? All right, there you go.
Several
I love
hands
it.
going up.
I love it. And yes, we broke ground, and if you've driven down Newburgh Road, you've seen the steel going up. So this was our recent groundbreaking at the future home of the Early Childhood Center, and we are off and moving. We were again on the site on Friday, and they've got the steel beams up of the first section, and you see the roof line starting to come up, and it is amazing how much work they've done. So they are on schedule, and we are hoping for an August 2024 grand opening. Lots of spring sports success. So you see here our Churchill Chargers softball players. They were district champs, and they made it all the way to regionals. Had a tremendous season, so congratulations to them. And then Churchill also sent a number of track and field team members to states this year up in Rockford. Just continue to make us so proud with all that they do. Over at Stevenson, we had Stevenson boys golf, softball, and the Livonia United boys lacrosse and the Livonia United girls lacrosse were all KLAA East champs. So you see lots of great pictures here, and we know how hard our athletes work and the time that our coaches give as well. And then rounding out, Franklin baseball had a tremendous season. District champs making it all the way to regionals. They had some very exciting games all the way down the stretch. And they also had, as did Stevenson, a number of students participate in the state championship up in Rockford for track and field. And if you had a chance to see, we had lots of state finals this past week, and we saw tremendous success out of the KLAA. So we continue to be proud of being part of such a strong union. And just a few reminders, mark your calendars. Yes, school is out, but there's still lots going on. So as we've shared with you before, the Livonia Education Foundation is having their first golf outing on July 23rd. There are a couple additional foursomes and a few limited sponsorships available for those of you who are interested. And really exciting, last year, our Student Services Department held their first summer unified camp for our students, and this year they are holding not one but three. So these are for our student athletes in grades K through 12 and post-secondary. So one will be at Franklin High School on June 22nd, Stevenson on July 20th, and Churchill on August 17th. So you can reach out to Mr. Kalmbach or Mrs. Boca if you have any questions. This flyer and information is on our website, but we would love to see lots of our students there and engaging with us through the summer. And that is it. We are just a huge shout out and thank you to our students, our staff, and all of our families for helping us to create a really memorable 22-23. And we wish all of our families a really safe, exciting, and joyful summer. Thank you, President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
No.
Seeing none, we will now move on to item 3C, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Anyone have written? Seeing none, we'll move to item 3D, response to prior audience communication. I do not have anything in this item, so we'll move on to item 3E, audience communication. Just to let you know, the board has three roles in the district. One is to set policy for the district. Another is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. And the third is to align our funding priorities with the district goals. Those are the three main roles of the board. Everything else that occurs in the district, which we call the day-to-day operations, are the responsibility of the administration. So anyone speaking at audience communication, if you have a question that you're asking a response to, if it relates to any of those three items that are the board's roles, you will get a response from the board. Anything else would come from the administration. The other thing is that we limit our speakers to 3 minutes. Mrs. Bradford will have on her phone a little tone. When you hear that after 3 minutes, I would ask you to immediately wrap up your comments. We do that so that everyone has an equal time to address the board. So with that, I do have a number of blue slips, and the first one I have is Aurora McCarroll. Is Aurora here? Hello. Is the green light on there? Just tap it. There you go.
Bring the mic
Yeah, you
down.
can adjust that microphone.
There you go.
If I could preface for a moment too, Aurora is here as part of an effort to try to draw some attention to some bullying issues which are not being addressed to the extent that she would like to see them addressed. I understand that you are not administrative, but still, just to clear the air. Thanks.
Go ahead, Aurora. Good evening.
Good evening. There is a kid in my class who constantly bullies everyone, even people who are in other grades and younger kids. Here are a bunch of examples of the terrible things he does. He throws a chair at the teacher 2 or 3 times, drawn a cartoon skull on his folder, point at the class and teachers, and then point at the folder, create massive disruptions during class, such as yelling and screaming. Sometimes he screams in general, sometimes he screams at people. Whenever a student says something he doesn't agree with or something he doesn't like, he screams and yells at them. Some kids are terrified of him. He throws erasers, markers, and other objects at teachers and students. This is how terrified the students in my class are of this disruptive child. One student once said that whenever this child does terrible things, she doesn't want to look at him because whenever someone makes eye contact with him when he's mad, he'll yell and scream at that person. The same student once said, whenever I go home, I always cry because I can't focus during class. I feel like I'm not learning. I'm afraid to look at him because he might single me out. One time when he started throwing pencils and erasers, the entire class shifted to the opposite side of the classroom that he was at. We were literally running away, trying to escape, but we're trapped in there with him. Kids at a Livonia school being trapped in dangerous situations. It is almost nonstop. At the beginning of this year, he used a binder clip to attack multiple students, including me. He grabbed kids and pinched their arms hard with these metal clips. After this incident, our school's principal sent me and the bully to the library. The principal then told him to apologize to me, and I forgave him, but I will never forgive him ever again, because after that he continued to bully and disrupt everyone, including me. There's a student in my class who is keeping track of the number of times that this bully has punched or hit another student. According to the student who is keeping track, this bully has punched or hit another student 9 times this year. But this information is from about 5 or 6 months ago, so this number is probably much higher now. This does not even include one of the 2 fist fights that he started this year.
Thank you. The next one is Jeff McCarroll. Good evening.
Hello. What my main concern is, and you'll also hear some more information about this as well, is that we have rules on the book which were established, I suppose, partially with the board and with the administration, in the student handbook saying that if a kid fights with other kids, there can be discipline up to and including expulsion. If a kid fights with teachers, there can be discipline up to and including expulsion. Destroying property of the school. Oh, we didn't mention the iPad, the Chromebooks. Yeah, he throws Chromebooks at people too, apparently. That all these types of things all have penalties up to and including expulsion. But I'm just wondering how long of a rap sheet somebody has to have before they get expelled, or before at least they get a month or something of suspension instead of a 1 or 2 day type of thing, which kind of rolls right off of them. They watch cartoons all day and come back and start right up again. What I'd like to see, hopefully, and I suppose I'll have to talk to administration as well, is to have the existing handbook and its rules enforced in a way that's more clarified and well-known so that the teachers and the parents and the kids all know what's next on an escalating scale of, punitive and corrective matters, and so that it's aggressively applied. There's a further situation that's completely separate from this sort of long-term disruption that's been going on at the 5th grade level, which apparently has been going on for a few years. I never knew about it because it seems that a lot of the kids who are in the class with this disruptive student, they think this is just a normal day at school because they've been in school with this kid for so long. It's just like, well, you get up in the morning, you grab your lunch, you grab your books, you go to school, terrible things happen, and then you come home. That's just how it goes, I suppose. And so it seems like they don't bring this up to their parents. When I've talked to parents about it, some of them will tell me proactively, oh, you mean such and such a kid. I'm not naming any names because I don't want to get, this is a little kid. You're talking about such and such a kid because a lot of the parents just know. Some of the parents, though, are kind of shocked because their kids never spoke to them because of the reasons which I just elaborated upon a moment ago. I feel like some of the kids are just sort of becoming slowly conditioned to what's happening. And so it's very worrying. And that's the bulk of my presentation, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
And this is
McCall.
at the same school. This is all at Nijiro. And we'll have a couple of people talking about a separate set of incidents that just occurred recently, which finally made me think, well, I've got to go talk to someone. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next one is Jenny, is it Granke?
So we have at Nijiro a culture of bullying that I don't think is being addressed very well. I'm going to talk about my incident, and this personally happened to me. I'm here tonight to talk about the bullying problem I have seen, and it extends beyond students. I have been a substitute teacher for 5 school years in LPS and other districts. It is a difficult job not knowing what you're walking into, but I enjoy the variety and the challenge. In the winter of this school year, I went into a classroom that I was familiar with. I had subbed there many times. Excuse me. Whew. As I came into the classroom, I noticed caution tape draped across the cabinets and books by the desk. I was confused but moved on and tried to find instructions for the afternoon. There were no instructions. As students began to return from recess, some were shocked by the tape and said, "What is that?" But then a group of students came up to me and told me it was there because of the sub. That was me. They explained further that their teacher didn't want the sub going through the teacher's things. I felt degraded, but I didn't want the kids to see this, so I just said, "Oh, I never go through teachers' things. That's one of my rules." I continued on with the afternoon, staying far away from the desk and trying not to use any of the equipment. Having worked at this school many times and knowing many of the families personally, I was humiliated to be portrayed as untrustworthy. It's hard enough to gain the respect of students in a normal setting, but when the teacher sets up a negative learning environment, it destroys any credibility I might have. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Next is Heather Collinash. Did I say that right?
You did.
Good evening.
Hello. I come here today to discuss a bullying prevention section of the LPS Elementary School Handbook published on the LPS website. Recently, my child was the subject of consistent bullying which had gone unnoticed for too long. We became aware 2 weeks ago when we got a call from the school based on a comment my child had made concerning hurting herself. And it required immediate attention from the principal and the school social worker. In this discussion, it was talked about how my child should have different responses to stressful situations, but what was not discussed was why she had that response. My child is very happy, optimistic, and joyful to be around, so when I got this phone call, it was very jarring for me and certainly not something that I ever expected. We decided to keep her out of school the next day in order to oversee and further assess the situation. When she missed that day at school, the children who had been bullying her, that at this point I was unaware of, took to social media once they got home from school that day because she was not there for them to unleash on. They sent her a barrage of messages over social media. All these children are in 4th grade. She received well over 100 text messages, voice messages, and threatening pictures, all of which was abhorrent. And on Friday afternoon, when I started reading these messages, I was sick, honestly. I alerted their parents, who were supportive, but when bringing this to the principal's attention, the process as it's outlined in the bullying prevention section, I was told that because it occurred after school hours and on social media, they were powerless to help. The policy states that the school is empowered to address bullying outside of school amongst schoolmates as long as it affects the school environment. When we brought this fact to the attention of our building principal, he insisted that the school safety officer and those above him have instructed him that because of what I had proof of occurred outside of school hours, that they were powerless to do anything, and that was coming from above. Clearly, this was affecting the school environment. The bullying originated at school, it was perpetuated at school, and when my child did not show up at school, the bullies proceeded to bully her over social media. I'm sure we're all aware of children who have taken their own lives or the lives of others due to bullying. It's a matter of life and death to not accept complacency on any bullying prevention policy, certainly one as published by a school district. I would like to know why building administrators are being told that they cannot enforce a policy that is published on their own website. Why school safety officers are instructing a building principal that they cannot have jurisdiction over bullying that occurs among schoolmates. I also believe that this is mandatory per the state of Michigan and quite possibly the federal government, that we are to have a bullying policy and it should be enforced. This policy also states that the superintendent is responsible for enforcing this policy, and I have emailed Superintendent Oquist and Elementary Director William Green and have yet to receive a response. I sent that email on 6/13, the Monday after this bullying incident occurred. I bring this to the school board as elected officials. I'd like to understand as an LPS parent, taxpayer, and registered voter of the city why this disconnect exists, and as elected officials, what you will do to ensure our children's safety is taken seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last blue slip I have is Bridget Casey. It's Bridget. Oh. Good evening. You can bring that mic down a little bit for you.
Yeah.
I'm very tall, that's good for everyone.
I'm sorry, I was outside. I'm going to have my son speak a little bit, and then I'm going to speak on what he has to speak on
Okay,
afterwards.
3 minutes total.
Yep, total.
Hi, my name is Darby Casey. I'm in 4th grade. I would like to tell you about the experiences I have had with my teacher. I'd like to start with one thing. In the winter, I wear snow boots to school, and once I get into my classroom, I always change into normal shoes. She started to rush me with shoe changing, so I was repeatedly yelled at by my teacher, and I started to change as fast as I could, and my shoes started to get ripped. Right here. Another example is one time my pencil case opened and all my pencils rolled off the desk. After that, she pulled me into the empty classroom next to ours and yelled at me. Here's another example I wanted to tell you about. One time, 2 of my friends were talking, and another one of my friends got frustrated, so she said something weird. One of my other friends came and told me, and he started laughing. Once again, I got pulled into the other room, and the others did too. She yelled at me about it, and I did not listen. I just looked her in the eyes, so she thought I was listening. Another time is my pencil case fell. She took me into the little hallway by the entrance and yelled at me. Thank you for listening, and I hope you take this considerately.
Thank you.
When I've brought in these situations up to the principal, I was always either told I was lying or my son was making stuff up or exaggerating it. Nothing has been taken seriously by the principal as far as what students bring to him about this particular teacher. It's been going on for years. The people who are supposed to be, like, we're supposed to trust with our children, I can't. I feel horrible sending him to school sometimes. He gets yelled at daily. The whole class gets yelled at daily. And I have asked the principal to send me emails, all of his responses in emails. And our communication has always stopped with him asking to speak with me. And the reason I've asked for written communication is for this specific instance. I can present those to you after or at a later date. I can send you when he stopped communication by saying he wants to speak with me when I have asked for any response from him through email and have not received it. A second thing I would like to address is our music program at the school. Since April, grades K to 3 have had music 3 times a week during our JLA language class, and grades 4 to 6 have had it 2 times a week. I have an email from the principal when I've brought this up saying that this was a little extreme and that they shouldn't be pulled from April when the music concert is in June that many times. His response is, it's normal. That it is normal for schools to be pulling kids 2 to 3 times a week for music months ahead of the music program. And the last week leading up to the music program, they were pulled every single day from a language class.
Thank you. I have no other blue slips. Are there any other blue slips that anyone would like to hand in? I don't see any. So we will move on to item 4, our consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that any board member would like to have removed? Seeing none, may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of May 22nd, 2023. 6G, authorization to accept resignations. 7A, approval of 2023-2024 lease renewals.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. That now takes us to item 6A, appointment of Student Services Coordinator. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Aaron Lawson as Student Services Coordinator beginning August 1st, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And who is this going to be? Mr. Abate?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, everybody. It is, I get the pleasure tonight to introduce Aaron Lawson to join us as a coordinator of student services and round out our fabulous student services team, many of whom are here in the group tonight for support. Tell you a little bit about Erin. She comes to us with 23 years of experience in special education, most recently as a coordinator of special education in Southline Community Schools, and then many years spent as a school psychologist in Walled Lake and Waterford schools. Make sure I didn't get that correct. There's also, Erin brings so much training and specialized skill, particularly in behavior analysis and working with our students. We know that we've had a lot of students who have come through the COVID experience, the pandemic experience, and still have it's been quite an effort to readjust to what we consider the normal school world, and so having that sort of background to bring as a complementary skill to our group, as an addition to our group, is pretty significant in our opinion. She brings specialized training in school-based behavior threat assessment and management, applied behavior analysis for behavior plan development, traumatic events, crisis intervention planning. She's also done a series of community events, parent groups to help parents work with, help their students through anxiety situations, helping families as we went through that COVID period, the pandemic period, to try to thrive when we were unfortunately had our schooling interrupted, which we felt was impressive. Through our process, we have felt that Erin just brings a lot of poise and professionalism, deep knowledge and confidence, and we're just thrilled to have her joining our team. I'll tell you a little bit about her education, just to round that out. She has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Cincinnati, a Master's in Educational Leadership and Special Education Administration from University of Detroit. And we have also a specialist in school psychology from the University of Detroit Mercy. She's just going to be a wonderful addition to our team, and our team will be complete. I believe our student coordinators will be 6 strong, so that's going to be good stuff. And welcome. Thank you. Aaron Lawson.
Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. We are thrilled to bring forward Mrs. Lawson's recommendation for appointment. We'll invite her up to the podium so you can meet her in just a moment. And no, you're welcome to come up now. She comes to us again from South Lyon in this role, and also with an extraordinary recommendation from a number of folks, but one I know you hold in high regard, Mr. Steve Archibald, who has shared with us what tremendous work Mrs. Lawson has done, and the educator and leader that she is, and the impact she's made in a short time that she has been with them, but in a very long and very well-respected career. We are absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to bring her on board. We believe her skill set matches so well with, we are going to have some folks who are moving on from our department into other roles or into retirement, and that left us with some pretty significant needs. And we are so excited because we believe Mrs. Lawson is just that person to fill them. So we're thrilled to have you here this evening, and I'd like to thank Dr. Terriel and our cabinet members who were part of the process of bringing Mrs. Lawson's recommendation to us, and thrilled to recommend her to you this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. What we'll do, any board member? Well, we haven't voted yet. And if there are no comments at this point, we'll go ahead and take the vote. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to approve the appointment of Aaron Lawson as Student Services Coordinator. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, the
Yay.
motion carries. Congratulations. Now, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate all those kind words, and they're very encouraging. It makes me even more excited to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Terriel and Mr. Abate and Mrs. Oquist. I appreciate all the kindness that has been extended to me throughout this process, and I really look forward to meeting my team. I haven't even met them yet, so I'm very excited for that. And I'm just really excited to be another advocate and help to our community here in Livonia, and I look forward to getting to know everybody better. So thank you so much.
Would you like to introduce your
Yes,
family?
I would. This is my husband, Kurt Lawson, and we're coming up on 24 years married. And this is one of my daughters who is able to join us, Vaughn. She'll be headed to Grand Valley very soon.
Congratulations.
Go Lakers. I have one other daughter who's not able to be here because she's studying abroad. She's in Barcelona, and she's also a Grand Valley student. So I'll have them both together in Grand Rapids. That'll be nice. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
At this point, we're going to take a 5 to 10 minute recess to congratulate our folks that have come here tonight. Thank you. Thank you, and we are now back from recess, and we will continue on with our agenda. We are at item 6B, leaves of absence. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bonnefield?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the request for leave of absence as listed below. Emily Goslow, 23-24 school year. Cindy Lonick, 23-24 school year.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, and are we hearing from Mr. Abate?
Yes, staff members listed in your board documents are requesting leaves in accordance with their collective bargaining agreements, and we ask that you please approve the leaves as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to approve the leaves of absence. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6C, resignations. This does not require a motion, but I am going to, at this time, turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you so much, President Johnson. I appreciate you giving me just a moment to share. We have a name on that list that we certainly didn't want to let go by without sharing some highlights of our very own Dr. Jennifer Terriel. Dr. Terriel is our Director of Student Services, and she has been offered and accepted the position of Assistant Superintendent of Special Education and Early Childhood Services at Wayne County RESA. So first, I'd like to give her a huge round of applause for her. Jen will be transitioning to this new and exciting role in early July, and as I shared with our administrative leadership team in my message to them, you can be sure that until that last moment, we will be soaking in all of her knowledge, her innovation, her inspiration, and the endless passion that she possesses. I'd like to share just a little bit about the impact she's made. Jen has spent her entire career here in Livonia Public Schools, and she has been just an invaluable and impactful part of Livonia Public Schools. She has been a school psychologist, a program specialist, a student services coordinator, and now is our amazing Director of Student Services. 2 of those she did at the same time for several months. She really does care deeply. She is a fierce advocate for students, for staff, and she lives the mantra, all means all. During her time with Livonia Public Schools, just a few highlights include her work to create and grow the Livonia Transition Program. For our young adults aged 18 to 26, we highlighted a little bit of that this evening, but this program truly has become the model of what should be offered to our students with special needs in this age group. Our students are on a college campus with same-age peers, thanks to Jen. They have meaningful work experiences, thanks to Jen, and many of them have now led to full-time employment, and most importantly, have had really rich and meaningful life preparation opportunities, thanks to Jen. Additionally, our Franklin Transition Program and the enhancement of our Skill Center offerings have flourished under her leadership and the leadership of our tremendous student services team. As you know, she has also been an advocate for the mental health needs of our students. And we are now at the highest levels of staffing that we have ever had in this district. Thanks to all of your support and thanks to her advocacy. I could not comment without mentioning the role she played during the COVID pandemic, and really has continued to play since that time. She was truly on 24/7. This was something none of us had ever encountered. And when Jen says to you, I will learn about it, I will take care of it, I will make sure we have what we need and our students have what we need, you know that it will be done. And she helped people through those, not just those beginning months, but as it continued on with something they had never dealt with, that we had never dealt with. And she and her team began a social emotional hotline within 2 days of our district shutting down. That hotline still exists today. She has individually counseled in the evenings, on the weekends, hundreds of our staff through the challenges of a diagnosis, of continued cases, and the impact that has had. And she has, most of all, built a team of leaders. She truly is a leader of leaders. And so many of them are here in the room with us this evening. We benefit from her counsel, her heart, and her wisdom every single day on our cabinet team. And now, the good news is, as hard as that is for us, those gifts will be shared and sprinkled throughout our entire county as she works to service 33 school districts and over 100 public service academies in her new role. So imagine her being able to do what she's done here and now impact and grow that sphere of influence across our district. We will continue to benefit from that because she will continue to be connected to us not only as a dear friend, but as a colleague. And so I will suffice to say she will be missed beyond measure. And we love you, Jen, and we congratulate you.
Any comments from the board? Mrs. Jarvis.
I just want to say it's pretty sneaky, President Johnson, to put that on a part of the agenda where we won't get to vote.
I take it there would be about 7 noes. Other questions? Mrs. Burton.
Yes. I'm not going to rehash a lot of the accolades and accomplishments that Mrs. Oquist has very eloquently shared with the public. But on a personal note, Jen has helped me with specifically a neighbor of ours who is a dear little guy, but he had his struggles, and he probably will always have some of his struggles. But I came to Jen in June and said, okay, some of us are trying to work with him over the summer, but we're not quite sure what's the best thing for, let's just say, a random second grader who might need help. Within a few days, I had a folder full of resources that were suggested for random second graders who might need some extra summer help. But not only that, Jen would continue to touch base with me and follow up with how is our little friend doing. And he is he's moved out of our district to another very caring, strong district. But it's to be a leader of special education in a district this size, and yet also keeping your pulse on the individual students by name who may need some of your extra care. That kind of thing will never be forgotten. It's not forgotten by the family. It's not forgotten by our neighbors who have never met you, but they know there's a Jen in Livonia Public Schools that helped us to help our little friend. And that kind of meaningful one-on-one interaction is what started your career, but it's not been let go as you've traveled up the leadership ladder. So thank you for being a dear part of not only Livonia Public Schools as an entity, but to individual students still as you lead a whole district.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. Dr. Terrio, I just want to wish you all the best in your new job, and we will certainly miss you here, but you've left such a good legacy, and I know the new team here is going to do great things after being under your tutelage for many years. So thank you for all you've done, and we know we're going to see you, so it's not a goodbye, but it is. This one does tug a little hard on everybody, so we're happy for you, very happy. So best of wishes on your new job.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. Other questions or comments? Mrs. Bonifield.
I just, with my experience with Jen, you've always been so kind and so caring and listened and helped us. And I can't say enough. And Jen always, I think you make everybody feel like they are the most important person and that you're
fully engaged and listening, and it's just, in the situations, you know, the situations that you have to deal with are often very hard. They're very emotional. And you make everybody feel like it's going to be okay, and we're going to do this, and we're going to get through it. And as everyone else has said, we will miss you dearly.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Others? Mrs. Frank?
I just want to say that it's very rare to get your amount of professionalism with a heart. And I think that's the thing, is that you serve so many people with such grace and kindness. And just as it's been said today, to have both, to be able to be a professional at what you do, because it is very complicated.
Yes.
The issues that you deal with are so complicated. But you do it with kindness, and I think that touches so many people, and you will leave a huge legacy here at LPS after you're gone, that you have started, things that you've put in place, and so we so appreciate that, those of us coming after, and that will continue to come after for many years, that you've started such a wonderful and incredible team, and a legacy that will continue after you're gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. And Mrs. Oquist will tell you, in our meeting, when she told me, I dropped my head in my hands. And at that moment, I thought, oh, no. But in the blink of an eye, I realized how beneficial it is to be able to spread your talents throughout the entire ISD. So it makes it a little bit easier. But I just want to thank you for your professionalism, your leadership. Every time, as someone said, you always made it feel like you were talking directly to that person. And I think that's a real talent. So thank you for that. Good luck in your new role. Hopefully this isn't the last we're going to see you. And just good luck. And I would ask you if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you very much, President Johnson, Superintendent Oquist, and my cabinet family, my student services family over there. It has been an amazing career here in Livonia Public Schools. This is a family to me, so I have loved every single moment of my roles, the different opportunities I have had to work with building administrators, the families, and the individual students, like Mrs. Burton spoke about. That is why I do what I do. My team over there, my student services team, is a true work family. We love one another, we support one another, and Livonia Public Schools will be better because they are going to continue their work here, the work that we have all set up. None of what you spoke about is truly about me. It is about the team that I'm surrounded by over here and the team that I've been surrounded by over there. So thanks everyone so much for everything, and I promise I will do my best to support every student in Wayne County and continue to support the students and families and staff here in Livonia Public Schools. So from my heart, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll.
Thank you, President Johnson.
I really hate to go on with the meeting.
I need a Kleenex.
All right.
Great, and I gotta speak.
Yeah, now Karen. Item 6D, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm good. Okay, all right, here we go. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Christine Gager, Julie Nielsen.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton, and is it Mrs. Keats?
It is.
Good evening.
Good evening. So tonight we honor and congratulate two members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools at the conclusion of the school year, which has already happened. As these staff members leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 60 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for the dedicated years of service they provided the students of LPS, and we ask the board please adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
This is just a tough emotional night in some respects. I do have to mention, there's always on this list some folks that, as was said, really pull at your heartstrings. Christy Gager, for those who were blessed to know her in Livonia Public Schools, is a counselor, as every counselor should be. There are a lot of responsibilities on each one of our staff members, and counselors certainly have a very long list. But at the top of the list every day for Christy has been taking care of the hearts of the kids who pass through her doorway. There are kids who weren't even assigned to Mrs. Gager, but who would seek her out. There were parents in our district, and throughout Stevenson High School, who got wind of her excellence in dealing with students, who sometimes were dealing with some pretty significant needs, and would seek out Mrs. Gager. There was always time. It didn't matter how late she was there. It didn't matter what hours it was going on. And her follow-up with students was incredible, is incredible still. She has maintained relationships with many, many of those students. She is a counselor as each one should be. If you're looking to go into the field of counseling, if you're not there yet, if you can spend a few minutes talking to Christy Gager and see how it's done. She is irreplaceable, and she will be sorely missed.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? Just congratulations on your retirement, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton, to accept the resolutions of appreciation for employees who are retiring. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6E, notice of discontinuance of teaching contracts. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent that the teachers, as listed, be laid off for the school year 2023-24, and that their teaching contracts not be renewed at the end of the 2022-23 school year. Be it further resolved that the records show that the reasons for this action are a result of declining enrollment, teachers returning from leave, and program changes. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education direct the Secretary of the Board to send a letter to each of the individuals listed, officially notifying them that their teaching contracts will not be renewed at the end of 2022-23 school year, and that they will be laid off as teachers of the Livonia Public Schools School District.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And again, is this Mr. Abate?
Yes, you'll actually hear both myself and Ms. Keats will tell you a little bit about both levels of the district. I'll tell you a little bit about secondary. So at present, we do not have layoffs in the secondary. Whenever we do have declining enrollment, as we've experienced, we typically do have to reduce. What we hope for in all of those situations is that it will be absorbed by attrition, retirements, resignations, those sorts of things, and in this case, it was. And actually, on the other end of it, we because we had some retirements in some specialized areas, like French, for example, or we had multiple retirements in one subject area, like math, we actually are hiring a few positions. Those are in process right now. We have teams of administrators working through those, identifying candidates to fill those, just a few positions. So no layoffs in the secondary. We did reduce somewhere just a little over the equivalent of 6 positions, and that was absorbed by attrition, like I mentioned. All right, and Skeets.
Yes, and regarding elementary, those are where the layoffs have come from. Specifically, when we look at our programming, Nijiero is in a separate category from our general elementary positions. So unfortunately, the enrollment was down at Niji, which necessitated the layoff of a couple staff members. We are hopeful that they may get picked up in our staffing process for our other elementary positions that we are currently interviewing for. So we would love to bring some of these folks back on, those that are qualified to teach general K-6 elementary classrooms. With respect to one of the other layoffs, it was a situation where we were overstaffed in a specific special area. Some of our schools had multiple staff members, and when we restructured for the PLTW specials going to K-6, we placed folks and we had just one too many, unfortunately. Of course, these staff members are qualified to come back if circumstances change over the summer. Should there be retirements, resignations, folks moving out of town, leaves of absences, they are entitled to their roles back at their respective buildings. And like Mr. Abate said, we are in the process of hiring for some of our other elementary roles due to need because of the PLTW pilot rolling out.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats.
You're
and
welcome.
Mr. Abate, any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to accept the notice of discontinuance of teaching contracts. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6F, teacher recall authorization. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and authorize the superintendent or her designee to begin, as soon as circumstances permit, the recall procedure for teachers who are on layoff. Said authorization not to exceed the 2023-24 staffing guidelines.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank and Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. So we appreciate this very much. When we have positions come open, as we often do in the summer and heading into the school year, if we have anybody on layoff, we want to move on that as quickly as possible to bring our folks back. And this allows us to do that and to bring it to you at a later board meeting. So we definitely appreciate very much that flexibility and the trust that you have for us to handle that properly.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions, comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve the teacher recall authorization. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7, our business matters. And our first item is 7B, purchase of multi-purpose room lighting. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the bid from Great Lakes Power and Lighting, Casco, Michigan, for lighting and electrical upgrades in the amount of $299,160, which includes contingency, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts with the recommended contractor.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford and Mr. Francis. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. This is one of these planned items that we've been working on throughout the district. We had quite a bit of conversation at the Committee of the Whole on how we have been doing gymnasiums at the various levels and sort of taking these off section by section and getting the lights in these gymnasiums moved from the current fluorescent over to the LED. So those are obviously, they have much more brightness for those spaces, and they use much less energy. So this is a sinking fund program that we've been running through, and these schools at Cleveland, Coolidge, Grant, Hayes, Hoover, Kennedy, Roosevelt, and Rosedale will be the ones that will be worked on this summer, and having the lights in those spaces switched out.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions, comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the purchase of multipurpose room lighting. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes, President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7C, high school weight room renovations. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve Rogers Athletic, Farwell, Michigan, Matic Construction, Livonia, Michigan, and SPEC Athletic, Plainfield, Illinois, for renovations to the weight rooms at Churchill High School, Franklin High School, and Stevenson High School, for a total amount $996,373, which includes contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And once again, we'll hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. This is a very exciting project that we're undertaking. I want to just preface with any folks who are tuning into this meeting and did not watch the committee of the whole, please, if you have questions or looking for details, we spent an extensive amount of time with all three high school athletic directors with us, the chief financial officer and the director of secondary, all joining that conversation, and the superintendent weighing in. So this has been something that we've been working on for quite a while, and essentially the overview of it is, again, I asked people to go take a look at that committee of the whole for more details, but this is a renovation of the Churchill, Franklin, and Stevenson High School weight rooms that are 20 plus years old. The structure themselves, as well as all of the equipment that's in it, except for some odds and end replacements throughout the years. The main equipment is all from original equipment. So this is a space that we are going to work on with regard to floor, electrical, fans, lighting, paint, etc., and all of the weight equipment that is in that. It's been very thoughtfully researched by those athletic administrators at the three high schools. There was consensus between not only the athletic department and the coaches, but the physical education department, because this is a space that will be used not just for student athletes, but for students. And that is really a focus of this program and the three athletic administrators in tandem with the curriculum departments of the physical education department. So this is, like I said, a collaborative project. We'll be using general fund for this. And we did put a little bit of contingency into those numbers, because even though there's quite a bit of the dollars being spent on equipment, we never know when you start going into spaces like floors and ceilings what you might find. So we did put a little bit of a contingency in there.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
I'd just like to thank our three athletic directors, in addition to our administrative team. Mr. Francis is always heavily involved when there are renovations to this magnitude going on, but it's not the job responsibilities that you'd think of first on the list for athletic directors, let alone ones that are in their first year with LPS. So thank you for doing a very, very thorough job on this. It is a very significant purchase, and we are aware of that. It is certainly, I believe, worthwhile and definitely in need, but it did take a very long time in terms of the amount of time to research and make sure that we are being recommended with the proper equipment, the proper building, from the building perspective and the equipment perspective, both. But thank you very much to the entire team, both the administrators, our athletic directors, for putting together this very significant package.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
Thank you. I also wanted to just thank you to each of your colleagues for coming and sharing all the details. One of the things that I was most excited about, and again, there's so many details that they covered, but the amount of students that are going to have access to this. And I think that one of the questions that was asked was, are we going to utilize this? And how much are we going to utilize this? And to be able to say, yes, we're going to have it staffed so kids can come in. This is going to be something that is going to be available to kids, that they can come in and use this. So it's not going to be used once or twice a week, that we're really going to use this for lots of the evening hours or after school and in the summer. So I'm grateful to be able to make this investment that kids are going to be able to use and take full advantage of. Both our female and male athletes and students to be able to come in there. The other thing, Mr. Francis, is you mentioned that we put some contingency in there. It's still within our normal range of contingency, correct?
It is. It's actually in a normal range for the pieces that would probably run into the contingency, but the way we put the contingency in is it's a smaller number, but for an overall project, dollar-wise, it's a lower percentage, but that's because, again, it's pretty standard. The big bulk of each high school's dollars are going towards that equipment, and obviously we could change one piece for another if there was some type of change in the layout or planning, but there should be enough in here for if they start to work on the floor or if they get into the ceiling and they have any concern. That's really where I think those dollars would be going. So I feel like there's after some forethought on this, some appropriate dollars for contingency in the spaces that we potentially could have to use them.
Thank you.
Mrs. Banfield?
Mrs. Frank already covered it.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Muscat, for being here this evening. We appreciate you being here and to your colleagues last week as well. So as I will echo the comments of the time and effort that was put into this, really once in a generation purchase. And so certainly starting our students off very, very well next year with a very well-equipped, safe, and carefully considered space. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Mr. Francis indicated that a lot of time was spent on this. I can't even imagine how much time was spent before the committee of the whole meeting, which lasted at least an hour. We had significant questions, a lot of time to dig in, ask what we wanted to ask. The presentations were outstanding. It showed the amount of time that was involved in researching all of this. We had all three of our athletic directors, Mr. Muscat, who's here, Dusty Hall, and Casey Conway. We also had all three high school principals here, Mr. Mazzoni, Mr. Pacey, and Ms. Casada. So it shows the involvement that they had. I was very satisfied with their answers to our questions, that they had chosen the right entities to be involved in this. I looked at the fact that that equipment that's in there is 20 years old, Mr. Francis, pretty close to that. And it has held up well. So I trust the presentation that was made, and we appreciate it. And this is one of those items where I said at the beginning, you don't hear a lot of discussion here, although there was a little more than normal. But if you really want to see it, watch the committee of the whole if you want to sit for an hour or more. But it was very enlightening to see the presentations, the equipment, the manufacturer. So we appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. Francis. If there's nothing else, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, to approve the high school weight room renovations. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7D, adoption of 2022-2023 final budget amendments. May I have a motion, please?
Oh, dear. Sorry. Thank you. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools approve the attached amended budgets for the 22-23 school year. General Fund, Funded Projects Fund, Special Education Fund, Debt Retirement Fund, 2021 Bond Fund, 2023 Bond Fund, Sinking Fund, Capital Projects Fund, Food Services Fund, Health and Welfare Fund, Scholarship Fund, and School Activities Fund.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Burton, and I will call on Mrs. Smith tonight.
Thank you,
Good
President
evening.
Johnson. And thank you to the entire board for the time that you've allotted for us to go over this in detail. Last week at our committee of the whole, we went through the budget books, and of course, leading up to the committee meeting, we had lots of discussions on the adjustments we were making to the general fund budget to close out this school year. So highlights from the final amendment, again, we started this school year off with a $33.7 million fund balance. I'm anticipating to collect $174.3 million in revenues, to expend not more than $177.5 million, so that we end the school year with roughly $30.3 $30.4 million, or a 17.2% fund balance.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
And just for the benefit of those who may not have tuned into prior meetings where we've discussed this, that 17% fund balance is right in the middle of the recommended 15 to 20% fund balance that we have, so that we have emergency funds and funds to start up the school year and so forth.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? As I indicated just a moment ago, we spent a lot of time on the weight room issue. We spent at least maybe twice that in various meetings, in our study sessions, in our committee of the whole. Mrs. Smith has been extremely thorough in presenting the budget, giving us the numbers, what it's going to look like in the future. And we certainly appreciate all of that work that you've put into this. We know that this starts months ago, and it culminates tonight, hopefully, in the passage of the budget. And you've given us, you always keep us on track. You always let us know the good, even the bad, when is necessary. And we appreciate that for you and your entire team. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Burton, to adopt the 2022-2023 final budget amendments. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7E, adoption of the 2023-2024 proposed budget and millage rates. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools adopt the attached proposed budgets for the 2023-2024 school year, general fund, funded projects fund, special education fund, debt retirement fund, 2021 bond fund, 2023 bond fund, sinking fund, capital projects fund, food services fund, health and welfare fund, scholarship fund, and school activities fund.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And once again, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you very much. As we went over in our public hearing earlier tonight, the proposed millage rates for this coming year are consistent with what we levied last year. So that's 18 mills for our operating millage, 4.1 mills for our debt retirement millage, and 1.5766 for our sinking fund. So with those mills, we will be able to adopt the proposed budget if it's approved by the board. I anticipate our beginning fund balance to be $31.4 million, our collection of revenues to be $176.7 million, expenditures to be $175.9 million, to end next school year with a fund and balance of $32.2 million, or 18.3%. So again, looking at a budget next year that keeps us within that 15 to 20% recommended range for a fund balance.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to adopt the 2023-2024 proposed budget and millage rates. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7F, tendering of prior bonds. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the attached resolution authorizing an offer to tender prior bonds and for the issuance of refunding bonds, delegation of the sale of bonds, and other matters relating thereto, including the authorization of the superintendent or her designee to execute necessary documents and agreements.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President
Too many
Johnson.
Bs.
This is another topic that we've had an opportunity to discuss multiple times, first at our committee meeting in May, and then again at our study session and committee meeting last week. With the board's approval. This would authorize the district to offer to buy back, i.e. tender, outstanding bonds from investors at a premium to market value, funded with refunding bond proceeds to achieve overall savings for taxpayers. So this allows us to proceed and again continue to garner interest from bondholders, I should say, and with the end goal of ultimately saving our community and taxpayers money in the form of interest costs. So this will be something, of course, we come back to the board with, and we'll keep you abreast on our progress with this. But if the board is comfortable with this, we would like to proceed.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the tendering of prior bonds. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you, and thank you for all the work, Mrs. Smith, on that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
That takes us to item 8, hearing from board members. 8A is establishment of date for first regular board meeting of 2023-2024. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District hold its first regular board meeting for the 2023-2024 school year on August 21st, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank. And you need to add anything, Mrs. Oquist, or not?
I do not, President Johnson, just for the community's information. Now that I've just told you I didn't have anything to add, I will note that while this is our first regular meeting, we will start meeting again in July for our study sessions, and then also committee of the whole meeting. So we will not be on hiatus until that time, but we will be back together on July 31st, but our first regular meeting will indeed be August 21st, 2023.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve the establishment of date for first regular board meeting of 2023-2024. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 8B, board members to attend MASB 2023 Summer Institute. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve that board trustees Madeline Acosta, Liz Jarvis, and Mark Johnson take classes August 8th through 11th, 2023 during MASB's Summer Institute in Clinton Township, Michigan, for a total cost of approximately $1,092.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Frank. Anything to add, Mrs. Oquist?
No, President Johnson, we always appreciate the time and effort that our board puts into their own professional development, and per board policy BBBC, these expenditures do require prior board approval, so we are appreciative to all of our trustees who will be taking part in MASB's Summer Institute.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Anything from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve board members to attend MASB 2023 Summer Institute. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to item 8C, hearing from board members. As is customary, I will open up for any comments from the board. Mrs. Bonnefield.
So I had my Livonia AM Rotary friends out to the cottage for our annual board meeting and a change of officers, and I was presented with a beautiful bench that's installed at Rotary Park that was a gift in memory of my late husband, Brad Bonnefield. and it's from my Rotary friends and my board friends, and it turned out so beautiful, you guys. And I should have brought the picture with me, but the emblem has the Livonia and our Rotary logos on it in memory of Brad, and it's so beautiful, and it's at Rotary Park. So I can't thank you guys enough. You were all supportive and helpful, and in my time while he was sick, I never felt like anything ever skipped a beat. You guys just stepped in and made me feel like he was the important thing, and which he was.
Wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Sorry, but you guys know what I mean,
Yes.
though, is that I never questioned, obviously, whether or not either my Rotary friends or my board friends were gonna make sure that the job was done, and had my back through the whole thing. So thank you so much. I just wanted to say it's absolutely beautiful. I have not had a chance to go visit it. We didn't get back from the lake until late last night, and then work and here, so we'll go visit the bench and see. But it's really, really lovely, and thank you so much to everyone.
Tammy, do you know exactly where it is at Rotary?
I think that it's in the front. I have to go find it. They tried to do you know where it's at, where you
I don't, all I know is that it's in Rotary Park. I don't know the exact
I think
location.
it's near the front.
Okay.
And I'm gonna have to go, I'll go explore and find it, but I think it was really lovely, and people are gonna be able to enjoy that for many, many years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. We are family here, Tammy, so.
Yes, we are.
Other comments, questions? Mrs. Burton?
And just following up on that, you and Brad have given so much of your lives through both organizations, through Livonia Public Schools and through Rotary, that there are so very many friends who wanted to do something meaningful and long-term. And to have that bench be placed at Rotary Park was a very, very quick decision. That's a great idea, and it was a fabulous location. But that is in memory of Brad, who was very dear to so many of us, and still is, and in thanks to both of you for all of your service you've given to our community.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Bradford, did you have?
Yes, I echo Colleen's sentiments, and I also just wanted to wish everybody, our staff and our students, a very happy and safe summer. And I hope that everyone from K to 12 is reading, going to the library, and taking advantage of all the activities that the local libraries have. And I'm just ready for summer vacation, so I hope everybody has a great one.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Frank?
As she said, we're all ready for summer vacation. I did read your note, Mrs. Oquist, that said your staff is working, your cabinet is working on planning for next year, and you guys are really coming in and what worked this year, what didn't work, how we're going to make things move forward. And so I just wanted to say I am really excited for next year. When we pass our budget, I said it in the first meeting, but when we pass our budget, there are so many exciting things going on right now in Livonia Public Schools. And as you are planning with your team this summer and what it looks like and getting people in place, that is a really exciting time for our schools. Most of us think of it as a summer vacation, but there's so much happening behind the scenes to get ready for August. And so I want to thank you, but I also want to say the future is bright in Livonia Public Schools, and it's really exciting. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Others? I want to congratulate all of our graduates this year, not only from our 3 high schools, but from our LTP program, from our Garfield program. What a joy it was to go to those graduations, to see the look, particularly the LTP graduates, knowing that they have a job It's just unbelievable. And again, thank you to Dr. Terrio for working so hard on that particular program. I remember when we started that a number of years ago, and it's taken off, and that's sort of your baby. So we appreciate that. To the graduates, be careful this summer. I know you want to celebrate, but please do it responsibly. And I always want to thank our cabinet, our administrators, our staff, and all the employees of LPS for everything they do for our community and our children every day. I know it's hard work, and we as a board certainly appreciate all that work. So thank you so much. And if there is nothing else, and if there is no more business to be brought before this meeting tonight, then we do stand adjourned. Thank you.